Welcome to another episode of Magic TV, where Luis, today we're going to talk about all things Yu-Gi-Oh! For one, which is going to be a weird one, but also all things Phyrexian and all things Remastered.
Phyrexia is going to be all as one, so I guess we'll talk about all things Phyrexia, sure.
I guess that's true, yeah. We're going to cover a wide gamut of topics today, so stay tuned. Welcome to Magic TV, once again brought to you by the fine folks over at TCGplayer.com, where you can go and pre-order all things Magic the Gathering, all things Yu-Gi-Oh!, all things Pokemon. If somebody prints it on a card, you can basically buy it at TCG Player. It's pretty much the line, I think. Now is probably the hottest time to pre-order your Phyrexia All Will Be One cards, though. We're coming right up on it. We got a month to go.
I actually just put in a big order on TCG Player for our cube here, and it was fast, easy, and I got all the cards I wanted. No complaints here.
This might be something that we'll tackle a little later, but surely this cadence of releases has got to wreak havoc on the old limited resources timeline for set reviews, surely.
It's not so bad because we don't review everything. For example, like Dominaria Remastered, one of the things we're going to touch on today, actually, we're not going to do a comprehensive review on that. We feel like
you do draft archetype summary kind of.
Right. The supplemental products are like the not main set products. We tend not to do like the full in-depth review, just kind of for our own sanity, as well as the fact that, like you said, there's a lot of products coming out, so we kind of want to spread things around.
No, but I would love to see an average minutes per year over the course of time. And I think it has 100% got up. The content output is absolutely insane. But if you want to keep up, if you want to do this, do as Luis does and get your fine Magic the Gathering cards over at tcgplayer.com, that's probably the best place to do it on the web. Luis, we're going to start with a fact or fiction today. And it's a spicy one, I think. Our fact or fiction today is there is too much luck in Magic the Gathering.
So you might think that I would say fact and agree because, there was a time when I was considered a pretty good Magic player. We'll see in Philadelphia if I still got it, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And you might think that a lot of good Magic players are like, wow, Magic's got too much variance. We should turn down the variance knob so you can turn up the skill knob, basically. Mm-hmm. I actually think that it is fiction that Magic has too much luck. I actually think Magic has a great amount of luck. Like I like where it's at, and it ebbs and flows a little bit, but mainly I think the biggest part of like any card game, there's basically a couple components. One is the resource system. Magic's is one with variance for sure, right? You don't draw enough lands, can't cast your spells, you're not going to win.
Right. When you say luck, people tend to think coin flipping and dice rolls, and that's kind of like an illusion, right? Obviously, those are luck elements, but what real luck is I don't have a forest. I can't cast half the cards in my hand.
Right. Or the game goes long and you draw too many lands. You draw 3 islands in a row in the middle of the game and you lose that game. So that's one part of it. And that's obviously like one of the biggest parts for most people, right? Like, I don't like Magic's mana system. I always get mana screwed. I always get mana flooded. Those aren't real games. They're not fun. That's valid. I mean, I'm not saying that it is fun to be stuck on 2 lands. You keep a 2-lander, never draw a 3rd land and lose, right? You don't feel like you accomplished much. But that's only part of the variance. The other part of the variance is you're playing a game where you draw a random card every turn. Sometimes you draw the right card at the right time. You draw, your counterspell the turn before they play their big combo piece. They play their big 6-drop flying threat. You draw Doomblade right off the top, right? And that isn't as in your face as something like you mentioned, a coin flip card or a dice rolling card, which is why they stay away from those cards being too good, because that rubs people the wrong way, where it's like, oh, this is like in my face. I'm rolling a die. If I roll 1, 2, or 3, I lose. 4, 5, 6, I win. That's not Magic. I didn't sign up for that. When drawing a card off the top of your deck,
you're rolling a 60-sided die every turn.
Exactly.
More or less,
it's exactly
right?
the same thing in terms of it's just different probabilities of good or bad things happening to you. It's just not quite as in your face about it. But what I think the genius of Magic is, and Richard Garfield nailed this day 0, right? The mana system gives the games a lot of texture. Yes, there are the games you keep a 2-lander and you never draw one and you lose. But can you remember the fun of the games where you keep a 2-lander, miss the first time, draw a 3rd land on turn 4 after discarding once, come back, really close game, and you end up winning? Those games are really satisfying.
So it creates moments. It creates water cooler moments more than just playing chess does.
Right, and it also gives to pick a name out of a hat, someone like Denis a chance to beat someone like me.
I feel like you're getting the dig in. What I was going to say next was it means that if you and I play 100 games of Magic, I'm not going to win 50 of them, but I'm not going to win 0 of them either. You know what I mean? Whereas if you're a chess grandmaster, play 100 games of chess, I will lose very close to all of them.
Yeah, probably every single one is my guess.
I mean, I can play for some draws, maybe.
Unless you've got a hidden chess talent that I don't know about.
I do not. I do feel like there's some things that make, and like Wizards have made a lot of changes over the course of the game, mostly with like mulligan rules and things like that, to try and just most, like you mentioned, smooth out the number of non-games, because nobody wants that, right? How do you feel about we're gonna get a lot of comments based for even this word, like the arena shuffler hand smoothing rules, where it would take 2 hands and give you a softer one and things like that. How do you feel about putting their thumb on the scale randomness wise?
So I understand the impulse. It's a really dangerous one, I gotta say, as a game designer who's kind of dealt with these systems before. When I worked on Eternal, this is one of the things we spend a lot of time thinking about. It's like, how is our mulligan rule going to work? How is this sort of thing going to happen? Because yes, you're right. People don't want non-games. Again, it is the really strong impulse to be like, what if we eliminated all the non-games? What if we just, if you haven't drawn a land by turn 4, we automatically make it so you draw a land. You can do that digitally.
Right? I mean, a digital game, you can do whatever you want. That's true. Yeah.
Or even in paper, where Magic could have an alternate rule where if like, you can choose to draw a land out of your sideboard or whatever, or search your deck for a basic land if you only have 2 lands in play and it's turn 4.
I think Legend of the Five Rings has a system like that. We had two separate decks for the one for resources. But anyway, we're getting a little far away from Magic.
Well, but you look at Hearthstone, and Hearthstone just ticks you up at one resource every turn.
Yeah, right? And I mean, Marvel Snap's no different either, right?
Yeah, and Snap, I think it's actually a lot better there because it's such a lean game. Like the whole point of that game is to reduce the amount of fiddliness. I mean, the decks are extremely small. Like you have a lot. You can only play 4 characters in 3 different locations, sometimes less even. But when it comes to Magic, the temptation is there to reduce that more, I think, than you should. I don't think Arena is necessarily doing a bad job. I actually think it's still at a pretty good spot. I mean, I can look at my win percentage in Arena when, I play best of 1, where it does do the 2-hand thing, where it gives you, it draws 2 hands and gives you the closest one to your land ratio.
To reflect your deck, right? Yeah.
Especially, and part of that is that mulliganing is even more brutal in a 1-game match, right? Just a best of 1 versus best of 3. And I look at that, and I look at how much I win, how much a lot of the good drafters win, using, of course, 17 lands. And it's not like the good drafters are winning 90% of their games. They're not. They're winning, 70% ish of their games, right? If you're really, really dialed in.
There's 2 things at play here, though. I think humans are like legendarily bad at probability. We're really good at pattern recognition and awful at probability,
which goes hand in hand.
Right. So I think there's a bigger delta than most people would expect between what we think random looks like and what real random is. And I think you guys have talked about this on LR before as well. If you get a person to draw what they think 50 coin flips looks like, and then do a real 50 coin flips, you'll get a lot more 5 or 6 heads or tails in a row than anyone would ever draw off the top of their dome. And the other thing is that I think people obsess about like the shuffler and luck and try, or even when they did the arena hands, when they think, oh, maybe it's slightly mathematically better to pay 23 lands instead of 24 and all this stuff, when you could really make so much more ground by focusing on literally any other aspect of how you play Magic. Yeah,
and honestly, like part of Magic's secret sauce is that you get mana screwed sometimes, or that your opponent gets mana screwed sometimes. Like here's a situation that, like what could happen in Hearthstone, right? That you trade off a bunch of cards, but you're behind. There's no hope in Hearthstone that they're going to draw 2 lands in a row in the middle of the game. They can't. There's no lands in your deck. Yes, they could draw bad spells, but
they'll draw stuff
their spells
right?
do nothing, especially with the hero power is really low. Whereas in Magic, how many games have you played where you're really behind and your opponent plays their last card, but you're like super behind and you're like, you know what? The only way I win is if they draw like 3 land in a row, and then they do. They draw a land and they play it and they don't do anything. They draw a land, play it, and now you're back in it. You've killed their only 2 creatures. All of a sudden, you might be at 1 and they're at 20, but now they have nothing. And you have 5 cards in your hand because you got mana screwed earlier. But your hope is that they draw a couple lands in the middle of the game. Magic, all that goes together with kind of why Magic is such a capturing game, such a game that you want to play for years and years and years and years. So I would be really wary of fiddling with the luck element too much, whether to make it. Usually the tendency is to make it so luck's actually smaller, right? To make it more consistent, to make sure no one gets mana screwed. I don't think that'd be good. I understand why new games don't typically have Magic's mana system. They have something more consistent. But honestly, I think Magic already has that buy-in. People have already accepted this as part of the game. And that frustration frustration's a really powerful element, and I think Magic's at a really good spot. So yes, I think it is fiction. I think Magic doesn't have too much luck. I think Magic has a good amount of luck, and I wouldn't want to change it too much in either direction, honestly.
I mean, I'd love to take devil's advocate for sake of discussion here, but I have to agree with you, you know? Like, I would rather play Magic than chess, and even in a less extreme example, I would rather play Mario Kart than Gran Turismo or Forza every day, right? Mario Kart is fun because it has blue shells and chain chomps. And sometimes, you know, you mentioned obviously like you're behind, maybe your opponent draws a bunch of lands, that gives you a window to catch in. Sometimes also you're behind, you continue to draw a bunch of lands, and that just puts the boot on your neck and puts you out of misery faster. Right. That happens too. But you're right. Magic is a highly emotional game, like you said. Frustration's a powerful tool, and the highs and lows are kind of what make it special. And it's hard to see that when you're in the lows. I understand, but I think you'd miss them if they didn't exist. So I think I agree. I think it's a fiction. With Phyrexia All is one on the horizon, Luis, we're going to do top 8 Phyrexian spells. And I wanted to kind of like, because that could mean a lot of things, right? I wanted to go for spells that have Phyrexian mana cost specifically, because they feel inherently very Phyrexian to me, not just it has an obliterate or whatever on the art.
Yeah, and why not highlight one of Magic's worst mechanics of all time?
Well, I would say most of I love Phyrexian. You mean worse from like a balance perspective, or
well? Yeah, balance, design, you know, and most of the categories you could come up with. Power level, no, is one of the strongest of all time. Power level.
Yeah, absolute all time around that.
I mean, look, I've paid Phyrexian mana a lot of times in my life to cast these spells. A lot of these spells are ones I put on the stack many times. So, because like
how many of them are banned in like eternal formats?
I mean, how many of them caught a ban in a we'll mention the ones that caught a ban in at least one format, but it's a lot of them, that's for sure.
It's a lot of them. All right. Honorable mention up first. This is one of my favorites, honestly, is Gut Shot.
Yeah, I had to put that on the list as an honorable mention because I think it doesn't quite crack the top 8. But the fact that I was able to make top 8 at a Pro Tour by tossing a gut shot at Frank Lepore is something that is indelibly etched into my memory. And, you know, the card still sees play. Like people put it in their modern decks that pumps Monastery Swift Spears and whatnot, gets you extra short spells and can kill a Noble Hierarch or Birds of Paradise for 0 mana, which is pretty huge. The faster a format is, the more 1 mana advantage in that kind of exchange ends up mattering.
Well, like you mentioned, you alluded to this being like a difficult to design around mechanic and stuff like that. It's difficult to think of an effect smaller than deal 1 damage to a creature or player. That's really very, very minimal. Like it's a hero power, like you mentioned. Yeah. But the fact that you can cast it for free, suddenly you're like, hang on now we're cooking with something. We can play with this.
There's, I think, been basically 0 spells in the history of Magic that you could play for free that didn't get at least a you know,
at least a second look, right? Yeah,
right.
So, like you said, Gut Shot on a lot of top 8 lists would make it in, but this one is obviously extremely stacked. Number 8, we got, I mean, pick your poison, right? Phyrexian Metamorph. Could be anything. Could even be a Metamorph.
Metamorph solid. This is actually one of the least egregious ones on the list because just to kind of point out one of the big issues I have with Phyrexian mana is it breaks the color pie, which is actually a pretty important part of Magic. I think a lot of people might not realize how much work it does. And getting to pay life instead of mana means you just don't have to have that color available, right? How many of these cards saw play in decks that could never pay the actual color of the cost of the spell, but are obviously willing to pay the Phyrexian mana? But giving clones to every color, that's not so crazy. It's not like clones have to be blue. And Metamorph being able to copy artifacts or creatures makes it play pretty well. You know, it does some things, and it's not egregiously broken like the rest of the list pretty much, but it is a strong and flexible card.
I mean, like you might imagine, the only reason it's probably not egregiously broken is because that Phyrexian mana symbol is preceded by the number 3, right? A lot of these other ones are going to be cheaper or payable with completely 0 mana. That's the real killer. Like you said, a normal clone is usually 4 mana anyway, so paying 2 life to get it for 3 isn't a big consideration. But you're right, I had overlooked that too. The fact that you can play this in your random red-green deck, or you're playing it in a cube or whatever, means that you'll just pick it up and go, yeah, I'll copy whatever nonsense my opponent cheats into play any day of the week.
Yeah, it can do a lot of that and still play with this card in cube, so it's a fun one.
Next up, we got one of the cards. This is one of my least favorite cards in all of Magic the Gathering, and it is Spellskite.
Spellskite is a tricky one. It's actually the only card on the list that doesn't have Phyrexian mana in its casting cost, but because it has an activated ability, you know, that passes the arbitrary rules that we
commander rule it in. That's fine. That's
right.
Color identity.
I kind of like Spellskite. We've got a lot of targeted effects in Magic, and having Spellskite as a way to kind of negate those or stop those is cool. You can get around it in weird ways, like if you Kolaghan's Command, targeting it and another thing you can't redirect because it's already being targeted. there is some cool stuff going on. And
we approach Magic from completely different places, because you're like, there's some cool stuff we're together. I'm like, this makes me feel like I need a law degree to play this game sometimes.
I've seen Mashi play. It does not help.
That's true. That's very true. Spell Scout, though, is one of those things where you don't realize how many things it breaks until your opponent plays it against you in like a random cube draft. And you're like, I'll just no, can't do that. No, can't do that. Can't do that. Can't do that. It's a total nightmare.
Well, they can't even be tapped out because of the Phyrexian cost. So it's got, the shields are never down unless you become, unless you're at 2 or whatever. Number 6, we've got mutagenic growth. So that's another free spell. And this is one that, like, again, if you're tapped out, you can still have it up, and saving your creatures with mutagenic growths is a pretty massive upside here. We had it in our sideboard to save Hero of Bladehold from Dismember, and actually the Scars of Mirrored and Pro Tour.
Battle of Phyrexian Manas, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, again, used with Prowess. That's the sort of thing that is popular nowadays. There's even Underworld Breaches getting thrown in the mix when you've got 0-mana spells that fill your graveyard, Dragon's Rage Channeler to dump extra cards in. But mutagenic growth, again, on the somewhat less offensive side, I still don't love 0-mana spells, because one of the things about Magic that these break is you're tapped out. I'm like, okay, finally the shields are down. I can do my thing.
And it's like, right, yeah.
Aha, mutagenic growth. And it's like, you always have to think about that. Magic has so much thinking that there's natural cadences, and taking breaks when your opponent's tapped out, you're safe. These kind of break that on the 0-mana or the 1-mana ones that can go to 0 mana. I
mean, also combat tricks are more, infinitely more punishing when you don't see them coming, and there's literally nothing you can do to see this coming. Like you said, if I swing at you with a bunch of 3/3s and I'm tapped out, you're like, okay, well, all the information I have should, broadly speaking, be in front of me here, and that's just not the case with cards like this.
Yeah, and as cool as it is for a combat trick to kind of make the big times and getting play, mutagenic growth can be a little obnoxious at times.
I think that's definitely fair. Next up, we have a complete other end of, like, if combat tricks are like vanilla Magic, Surgical Extraction is about as far away as you can get from that.
This is one I actually do like costing 0, because the effect of exiling, all copies of a card, you get the one in the graveyard, you get all the ones in the deck, all the ones in the hand, everything. The fact that it's 0 mana and instant speed, it's not like a combat trick, like you said. It doesn't have quite the same effect. And the people it punishes, this is important, it punishes people who are up to nonsense. You don't side in Surgical on the fair. You side in Surgical when your opponent's trying to reanimate Archons of Cruelty, or that sort of thing, and or their deck relies on exactly one combo card. One of the old plans of like Fulminator Major Urza's Tower, Surgical Extraction it. Yeah, I'm in for that. I'm in for punishing the people who have these really linear, narrow, kind of like nonsense decks. And Surgical Extraction is pretty much the best of this effect that I can remember. It really does a good job of kind of getting the things you want to get out of the game completely.
It doesn't even have the caveat that cards printed like this nowadays have, where if you get something out of their hand, they get to draw a replacement card and stuff.
That was new technology, and it's good technology.
Yeah, well, it's definitely more fair technology, because like you said, it's instant. You can hit this in the draw step. If they happen to draw another copy of whatever they're trying to get, that's gone too.
Yeah, it is great. And Surgical Extraction, I think, is probably, after Phyrexian Metamorph, the least offensive card on the list.
It's also my favorite art of the cards on the list. I know that's not usually a factor, but it's just this cool. Like otherworldly, like I can hear this like humming in the background when you see this guy spying and lifted out of his body. It's awful. Next up, we have the opposite end of the mutagenic growth spectrum with Dismember. This is a card I'm a huge fan of.
So this is the one I think that breaks the color pie the most, because it gives access to removal to any color: mono white, mono green, mono blue, all the colors that aren't supposed to get -5, especially for 1 mana. And
it was one of the most like flexible types of removal as well. It's not, it'll get indestructible things. It's not damage or destroy. It is one of the most like difficult to guard against kinds of removal as well.
Yeah. It gets around, like you said, indestructible. It gets around regeneration for the very few cards that have that these days. It even can kind of work in combat when their 6/6 attacks into your 3/3, and this can shrink it completely. So again, no argument that Dismember is not extremely powerful. Like you said, very flexible, gets played in tons of decks. I do think that Dismember is the one that makes the biggest mockery of the color pie, and I do have some qualms there. But yeah, it's a great card. I mean, you play it a lot.
I mean, you pay 4 life every time, right? I mean, if you can afford to, because it doesn't matter, whatever. Like you'll pay that gladly, I think, basically whenever, especially if it's on a Hero Bladehold, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and I would say that this most often goes in decks that don't really have the option to even pay the black mana. Because if you have access to abundant amounts of black mana, you can actually do a little better than that on rate. There are
Right.
removal spells that, like Fatal Push, is a lot less painful. If you've got a lot of swamps in your deck in Modern, for example, you're going to put Fatal Push in your deck before you're going to put Dismember in your deck.
But putting this in your green blue deck, suddenly that's something you're not supposed to really have access to at all.
Exactly. The Tron decks, or Eldrazi Tron getting to play these to kill things when they have all colorless mana. I mean, that's certainly a big help for them.
Next up, we have, I think actually, I was a big fan of Dismember. I think this is actually my personal favorite card in the list, because it has such long, far-reaching effects, which is Birthing Pod. And the reason I love Birthing Pod is because you get it, you pick it up early in the draft, and suddenly that changes every pick for the rest of the whole draft. You're like, wait a second, so if I can chain this to this to this to this to this, I love that so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like the awesome part of Birthing Pod. We're now reaching the part of the list where every card has been banned in yes. one, if not multiple formats.
All the podium positions are banned. Yes,
exactly. And Birthing Pod, look, I think it's fantastic for Cube Draft. It's not even that good in Cube, but sometimes you pick it up and like you mentioned, you draft around it, and that's great. In Constructed is where it had issues. In Standard, it was really cool. Like it did some fun stuff. You sack a Strangleroot Geist or whatever, and you kind of get your value.
Yeah, you get 2 for you.
Modern, it had to go because it was too easy to combo off. It originally with like Melira, Viscera Seer, Kitchen Finks, but then you've got your Deceiver, Exarch, Untapped Birthing Pod, so kind of nonsense, go up the chain to end up with an Exarch and a Kiki Jiki in play, that sort of thing. And when it went from a utility card to a combo card, I think the card got a little less interesting when it just is like, oh, it ends the game when you activate it. That's a lot less cool, and that's ultimately why it got banned. When it was like, let's turn my Kitchen Finks into a Restoration Angel so I can blink the Finks.
I gained a bunch of life. Isn't that cool, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, turn this into something else. That's a very different feeling than the combo pod.
That's why I like it in draft, because you have to kind of cobble it together. You can't sit and build the perfect curve and the perfect plan and figure all out. You're doing it for random value plays, and I think that's much more to where the card feels like it should be rather than trying to get an infinite geekies for sure. Do you think it needs the Phyrexian mana symbol in the activation? If it was just 2-tap?
I think if it was just 2-tap, it would have been a lot less good in Constructed. I think that would have pretty big damper on it in Constructed. In draft,
2 mana is most of a turn, really, right?
And it would also stop the curve of like 3 mana, play Birthing Pod, 4 mana, play a 3-drop and activate Birthing Pod.
Yeah, it just kicks everything back 1. That's true, yeah.
Yeah.
Number 2, now it's getting spicy. This is one that I was shocked to see not at number 1, and it's going to probably give away what number 1 is, as you might imagine. But number 2 is Gitaxian Probe.
Yeah, this might win the vote for after Sensei's Dividing Top, like one of the most obnoxious cards in Magic. The opportunity cost is so low here, 2 life. That's it. Just 2 life. You don't have to pay any mana. You get to see their hand, which is a pretty big advantage in some formats or some matchups, right? When you both have counterspells in your deck, this is huge to get to see them. But even in any matchup, it's powerful, but it's also pretty obnoxious when you're the opponent and your opponent just gets to see your hand. Like
it's invasive, right? It's
insulting. It feels very Phyrexian. When you're sitting in Cube Draft, you draw your opening hand, your opponent's first play is Gitaxian Probe, pay 2 life, and you're like, all right, here's what I have coming. I was hoping to surprise you with this, but nope, here it is. It's right on the table. And as it turns out, you're supposed to place tons and tons of Gitaxian Probes in your deck because, again, the cost is so low. When you have things like Grim Lavamancer, Snapcaster Mage, Dragon's Rage Channeler, Delve cards, just
anything filling your bid, anything rewarding you for casting spells, anything to like any reason at all, really. Even in discounting all of that, though, you mentioned earlier that like Phyrexian Metamorph breaks a fundamental part of the game in the color pie. This breaks an even more fundamental part of the game of you don't know what's in your opponent's hand. That's very core to the Magic experience. Hidden information is a huge part of the game, and this just totally wipes that away for actual no cost. And in some cases, like you mentioned, pure benefit.
Yeah, and as unpleasant as it is for you, you might think, well, the opponent's getting an advantage, but it's also kind of unpleasant for them. Like I think Magic's a worse game when you can see your opponent's hand. So for that reason,
like an ice cream for breakfast kind of way. People think they want that and they don't. Yeah.
Look, it's a strategic advantage. If you ask me at the start of the game, do you want to see your opponent's hand for free? I'm like, of course, yes, that'll help me win. But I think Magic would be a much worse game if it was designed such that both players played with their hands face up. And Gitaxian Probe adding more of that experience to the game is not good. That plus the ubiquity that it just showed up meant that it did get banned in Legacy, restricted in Vintage, and banned in Modern. So.
Well, it's just very difficult to imagine a game of Magic where you wouldn't want to just have this in your opening hand because you're basically just starting at 18 with 39 cards in your deck, fine, or 459 cards in your deck, easy, every day of the week, no problem.
Yeah, so it's a good riddance to that. But number one, yeah, that's a controversial one.
Number one up here, we have Mental Misstep, which once Git Probe's out of the way, I think it's pretty clear this is going to be front runner.
Yeah, so this is again 1 blue Phyrexian mana. That's it. So 2 life, no actual spending of mana. Counter target spell that costs 1. And I did play in a Grand Prix in Legacy when this was legal, Grand Prix Providence many years ago, and just everyone basically either had 4 mental missteps in your deck, or you were playing a deck with no 1-drops, which is a challenge level, but it was good because it stranded your opponent's missteps. There were a lot of people in the tournament who unfortunately showed up with a deck that had like 8 to 10 1-mana plays and no mental missteps, and it's just like all you're asking is to get your Noble Hierarch, your Swords to Plowshares misstepped with no recourse. And it was kind of this tax where you just like had to put 4 of this card in your deck. Again, completely nonsensical. When you draw it in Vintage and you get to mental misstep their first 1-mana play, it just feels so busted.
Well, it's just like you mentioned, it's this tax you have to play, and not just the 8 life for casting them all, but like it's a deck building tax, and that's part of it being colorless because of the Phyrexian mana. Is that like when you go to build a deck in that time, auto include, you just put 4 of them in like 90% of the time, and that removes at 4 slots of what is one of the most interesting parts of the game, which is deck building. And Wizards, to their credit, ban a lot of cards for ubiquity reasons, not because they're necessarily individually super powerful or super broken, but just because that experience for the game overall is kind of boring.
Yeah, and mental misstep certainly falls squarely into that category, and definitely not a card you want to see more of. It's again, for good reason, banned in Modern, banned in Legacy, restricted in Vintage. It was actually okay in Standard. I remember playing like 2 in your Delver decks or whatever.
That's just because there's fewer 1-drops around, right?
Yeah,
that's good.
Exactly. You actually ran the risk of drawing these and having them be bad. But overall, really, I think Gitaxian Probe captures the Phyrexian experience the best of all the cards on this list, where it's invasive, busted, obnoxious, all that stuff. Mental Misstep's not far behind. And in terms of power level, I got to say that Mental Misstep's probably the best one on the list. But this is a powerful list. Phyrexian mana is a really powerful ability. I know they brought back in like very, very small doses Phyrexian mana, and we're going to see a little bit more Phyrexian mana in the new upcoming set. What we're not going to see, and I'd be willing to bet, is cards that cost 0, cards that completely break the color pie. Like there's ways to harness Phyrexian mana that aren't as destructive as the original slate of designs, but it was
the delta between 1 and 0 is way bigger than the delta between 3 and 2, right?
Totally. And like to begin with, I think this mechanic is dubious and dangerous, but it does depend on designs. And then the first set of designs were like exactly why you don't want to do this. Gitaxian Probe, Dismember, Mental Misstep. It's like, oh, right, this is exactly why Phyrexian mana is bad. I think with an over a decade plus all these lessons learned, I would be surprised if Phyrexian mana fell into the same pitfalls in the new set.
I'm worried it'll just feel neutered though, because we know what the super spicy kind looks like.
Yes, it will. There will be that comparison, but I bet we're going to see some really fun designs. We've already kind of seen some, kind of release, or I actually leaked, I think, but we've already seen
them. How they came to the table is irrelevant. That doesn't matter.
and I think Phyrexian mana is going to be cool. So we'll see how it ends up. But this is our top 8 Phyrexian cards with the honorable mention of Gutshot.
All right, Luis, how familiar are you with the gentleman's Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game?
Pretty unfamiliar. Like I know that the attack and defense are like in the thousands, but
and they never use those last 2 digits really.
Yeah, you can kind of cut off some of the trailing zeros. I know that you don't spend mana on things.
This is a lot, because I went a little softer on this because I'm going to give you some Yu-Gi-Oh cards and get you to judge them. And I was like, well, maybe Luis is a game designer. He's got a lot of experience with card games. What if he knows a bunch of these cards? So what I've done is I've taken a couple of Yu-Gi-Oh cards that are real and silly, and I've made some fake Yu-Gi-Oh cards that are equally silly but not real. And I want to see if you can tell what Konami let out the door versus what I let out the door this afternoon. Yu-Gi-Oh was my growing up game. That was my schoolyard game. I absolutely loved Yu-Gi-Oh. Pokemon cards, I collected a little bit, but I didn't like the game very much. Yu-Gi-Oh, look, they made a TV show where you played the card game. That was done for me. I was sold. I came to Magic much later because it is a much, much, much better game to play, I think. I don't know how hot a take that is, to be totally honest. It's probably hot among Yu-Gi-Oh players.
Among people watching this, probably not that hot.
That's true. I am preaching to the choir a little bit. I'm hedging a little bit. First one up, we have Na. It's a spell card, and wonderful art, as you might come to expect from Yu-Gi-Oh as well. How are we feeling about na 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 na? I think I'm saying the wrong number of nas, but it's very easy to get carried away.
No, no, no. All right. Targets level 7 or rank. Target level 7 or oh, sorry. Targets one level 7 or rank 7 monster you control. It gains 700 attack and defense until end of turn. This looks like a real card, and my guess is it's not actually that good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's definitely not very good. It's extremely niche. Remember, like we mentioned how there's, Magic has all these resources and stuff. The only resource in Yu-Gi-Oh is cards and time.
Yeah.
You can if you can find a way to dump everything in one turn, it'll let you do that. And to be honest, most of Yu-Gi-Oh plays out quite similarly to that, it turns out. What I love is this a 4:59 p.m. card naming decision? Like, how do you get to na?
Yeah, that's a good question. Nanana? It's like a banana, but a nanana.
What they would do a lot, especially back in the day, they would write themselves into a corner in the anime, and they'd have to invent a card to get out of this really specific, incredibly niche thing.
That makes sense. That's cool.
But they have to print it.
No, that sounds awesome. Honestly, as a game designer, I would love that. It's like, all right, you got it. It's like, what did the guys writing the show do again? Oh God, we have to make one of those. All right, fine, we'll do it.
It's so funny because it's always like, oh, Denis, target Karibo gets plus 500 attack, but only if there's a full moon card out, and this and all these conditions.
Yeah, that does seem tough.
But it's just like, why do you just don't have to print the card? It's okay if it's not in the set, because they're always terrible as a result, because they're always mega niche. And even the art of this makes me feel like this is definitely from like Yu-Gi-Oh! GX or 5D or something that I did not watch, that we've leaked it from. Next up, we have Temple of the Adventurer, not quite from the Nanana. Why do I struggle to say that so much? Not quite from the Nanana school of thought here.
Spell card, increase the attack and defense of all Earth monsters by 200 for each other Earth monster on the field. I don't get the flavor at all, of course, but I'm going to say this is not a real card. I'm going to say this is a Denis joint.
This is a Denis joint, and this is my attempt to recreate Adventurers Guildhouse in Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically,
bands with all other
bands with all other. I was like, this is the clip.
Sure.
And look, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Text box sizes. One favorite thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! is they have such a tiny text box on cards, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards are already smaller than Magic cards and Pokemon cards. The art's way bigger, tiny text box. That does not factor into how much they edit down the text at all. So they would happily put banding in, give you all the rules text, get out your magnifying glass.
Also, from what I've seen, the font is also very small.
It's very small. It shrinks to like you would not believe. They just don't care about that at all. But no,
this one just seemed a little obnoxious to resolve, which is not outside the realm of Yu-Gi-Oh, of course, but it did.
If that's your razor, you're not going to make it very far in this game for sure.
I'm 2 for 2 though, so
that's true. You are 2 for 2. Let's take a look at Deep Hole Filled with Acid.
Target one face down defense position monster on the field, flip it face up, then destroy it if you have a card with the same name in your hand. This feels like a real card, and it feels like I could see this being good if the metagame's really set. But my guess is not that good.
It's not even a real card. This is a Denis Straniak original. I have cheated a little bit.
It was too weird for me to think you made it up, honestly.
I mean, right? Oh, I did cheat a little bit there, because this is quite similar to a trap card called Acid Trap Hole, which is where I stole the art from. The effect is decent enough. The add, if you reveal a card, that I completely added in. But it is definitely not out of the design space of Yu-Gi-Oh! I would say at all. But you're right. If the meta is super set, suddenly you're like, it's amazing in the mirror match, right?
That's what it looks like, yeah.
So if you thought Deep Hole Filled with Acid was a card, remember that's a card that I made up. That name is not a real Yu-Gi-Oh! Card. How do you feel about this, which I feel like you'll actually appreciate?
Hungry Burger is a warrior. It's a 2000 1850. So they're
getting there, using the whole
yeah. Warrior/ritual. This monster can only be ritual summoned with the ritual spell card Hamburger Recipe. You must also offer monsters whose total level stars equals 6 or more as a tribute from the field or your hand. I don't really know what all that means.
That doesn't I mean, it's not super good. Let's put it that way. It's ritual cards are very old fashioned. They don't really print them all that often anymore. It's very much an anime consideration, I would say.
This looks like a real card then.
Because why would I make a burger card, right? Like, that's so silly that there's no way. And you're right.
It's a burger with teeth, and yeah, this is so you offer monsters as a tribute.
That's just how rituals work in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! You offer them, you do a little spell, you cast a spell, you
So this eats all your monsters with 6 or more stars.
Or I don't know if it eats them or that's what the patties are made of. I'm not sure what the is.
Sure.
That might be what the hamburger recipe is, but no, this is a real card. And I don't remember this being in the anime. I don't know why this or why mechanically it's this and isn't just, a big dragon or whatever.
I just got to say, we did this 5 years ago. I'd feel a little differently, but Magic doesn't have much ground to stand on at this point. We've got Transformers in the game. We have Walking Dead. We have Warhammer cards. Like,
we don't have the Five Guys crossover though. We don't have a Five Guys secret lair.
Comet the Space Dog. Like, do you remember when Arby's made that joke tweet about like you can get the Meat Mountain if you buy Magic card if you buy a Meat Mountain sandwich on this one day? They had a tweet saying that.
I guess they're not that far, yeah.
People believed it because it was actually plausible. So Yu-Gi-Oh gets to do Hungry Burger. Maybe they're just ahead of the times.
No, that's true. There's someone sweating. Blake's sweating over it, which has been like, oh my God, did they get a leak for the Hungry Burger card as well? Oh my God. Taking things down a little notch in terms of like how fantastical these are. How do you feel about Just a Big Ant?
Just a Big Ant. It's just a giant ant, a 500, 600. Doesn't seem, I guess that's pretty big for an ant, but not that big in the scale of Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yep.
I think you made this one up.
I did make this one up. It's not that far out of, I think the original card this is called Big Insect, and the numbers are tweaked, but it is just a big old ant. Like there's no flavor, no effect, no synergy with anything else. Early on, like the power creep curve for Yu-Gi-Oh is very much a 45-degree angle. So early cards were garbage for the most part. And this is very, very close to one of those. Continuing, I guess, our food theme, moving on from the burger. How do you feel about this Elder Soar Pickled One?
Elder Soar Pickled One. It's a 2300, 2100 dinosaur / effect. This card cannot be special summoned. Destroy this card at the end of the damage step. If this card is destroyed, return it to your hand. I see. So it's presumably like pretty decent stats, but it gets destroyed. If it gets destroyed but doesn't die during fighting, I see. So if it survives a battle, it returns to your hand.
Yeah, doing some zone hopping in the way.
Yeah, I'm looking at this and wondering why it just doesn't return to your hand if it survives the battle, but whatever. I think that this is a real card.
This is one that I made up, Elder Soar Pickled One, and I was worried because the art I stole from Monster Hunter. So if you had played Monster Hunter, you might have guessed it that way.
Not my jam either. All right.
Those things do happen.
You tricked me twice.
I'm proud of that. Those happen a lot, where cards will do random things and return for no reason because, like I said, it got deep fried by the chef character in the anime and had to come back with a big reveal at the start of the next episode. That is not out of the realm at all.
Well, that's how you got me. Is that instead of just bouncing, it destroys and then comes back if it's destroyed that way. And that additional layer of complexity, as weird as it was, made it feel more real rather than less. Because
it feels like they were designing it within a weird constraint, not I was just typing it. It would be more elegant if I was just typing it.
Maybe we found your calling, Yu-Gi-Oh card designer.
I mean, the bar is very low, so I think there's a chance for that. You mentioned earlier about the font getting tiny. Here's a premium example of that in the text box in the card name.
Interplanetary Purple Thorny Dragon.
Interplanetary Purpley Thorny Dragon.
Purpley Thorny Dragon. Dragon effect. If it's destroyed by a battle card effect, you can graveyard, you can special to summon this card. I see. I feel like you wouldn't try to trick me twice. I feel like this is a real one.
This is a real one, and I don't understand how or why or what could possibly have possessed them to even have whatever about the effect. Name. It's fine. Interplanetary Purpley Thorny. It has to just be a butchered Japanese translation, right? There's no other way.
I would imagine so. This is also just the fact that it's like jammed all together, all one word in the text. There's actually a little break between Interplanetary Purpley Thorny and Dragon, but this is again so wild it couldn't be fake.
Exactly. And it's weird that, like, I think they're trying to transliterate them because I feel like you could just be like Cosmic Purple Dragon and you get like 90% of the meaning across, right? But obviously somebody there has got to be like, every single syllable of meaning in this has got to make it to the English version, come hell or high water. Going to the opposite end of the naming spectrum, how do we feel about People Running About?
People Running About. So 600 Pyro. I think you made this one up.
I wish I had the sage wisdom to make the card People Running About. No special effect. Fire type for no reason at all.
No, this is great. I love people running about. That's a good one. So explain to me though, if there's no casting costs, why would you play a 600 instead of a 2000?
Anything over 4 stars, you have to sacrifice a creature in play to play it. And anything over 6, you have to sacrifice 2 of them.
I see. That would explain it. Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, that's you. To be honest, though, that's like nobody plays cards like that. You're doing backflips and taking things out of your extra zone and ping ponging between your deck and sacrificing 3 cards that are all burger ingredients and stuff to get things into play most of the time in Yu-Gi-Oh. All right, last one, and this is one that this is probably my favorite one on the whole list. Actually, how do you feel about Anteater Eating Giant? Anteater Eating Gant.
Eating Gant. Anteater Eating Ant. So 2,500, 5 stars. I know what that means now.
Yeah,
this card cannot be normal summoned or set. This card cannot be special summoned except by summoning a spell or trap card. You control the graveyard. If you destroy a spell or trap card, your opponents, you can activate this effect. Anteater Eating Ant. Again, this is too weird for me to think you made this up. I think this is
messing up the name didn't help either.
Anteater that didn't give me a huge clue either way, but yes.
Anteater Eating Ant is a real card. And you might have noticed reading like that effect. Magic does this cool thing where they'll keyword abilities to shortcut things and make it easier. And you're like learning the language of the game. Yu-Gi-Oh spells absolutely everything out from first principles every single time.
Yeah, there we go. I mean, if you don't view text as a cost, then why not, right?
I mean, you can just make the font smaller, right? Why?
Yeah, exactly. Stop now. Yu-Gi-Oh is it's a wild game, I gotta say.
I don't think this is the last time we're going to.
So I got 2 right. I went 6 and 3. All right, not so bad.
2/3 ain't bad. And bizarrely, a lot of these cards you can order on TCGplayer.com right now. So go get your Anteater Eating Ant. Luis, I want to talk to you a little bit about remastering sets because we've had a couple of them now. We have Dominaria Remastered 2, and I wanted to talk about what your feelings on, the difference between the online only ones and the paper ones, and what's on your remastered wish list.
All right. So first of all, I should probably explain what Remastered is for those who don't have their fingers on the pulse of every product, which honestly, as most people, it's pretty hard to it these days.
It's getting difficult. They're ramping up that difficulty for sure.
So I believe the first remastered set was Tempest Remastered, if my memory serves.
I think that's right.
But
that was on Magic Online, right?
That was only on Magic Online. So what it was they took Tempest, Stronghold, and Exodus and chose a selection of those cards, packaged them all in one product, one pack, and then you could draft with it.
Right, which is not dissimilar to what they're doing with Dominaria Remastered now.
No, and so Dominaria Remastered, that one's a little further ranging because it's any eligible or any set that took place on Dominaria.
Right, so it's not just the 3 in the block and they can mash them together. It's a lot.
Right, it's a ton of different sets. And this is a paper product where they made a set out of all, using basically we can pull cards from any of these sets that occurred on Dominaria, and we're going to put them in one set, put them in booster packs and sell it to you, right? And you can buy booster packs, you can draft with them. And the remastered sets, I think, accomplish 2 goals. There's also been remastered sets on only Arena,
which are pretty, they're similar enough to the Tempest Remastered one. Like they had Amonkhet, right? And I think they've announced Shadows over Innistrad 2 down the line, and Kaladesh as well.
Right. What they do, they do 2 things. The main thing they do is for Wizards' perspective is it's a product you can buy, but that's fine, right? That's their job.
But they don't have to put nearly as much R&D and art into it.
They're not designing new stuff. They're not doing new art. But it gives you a new draft product, so you can either online or in paper buy the packs and draft with them. And it also is a way to reprint cards, which it serves their purposes in some ways and serves the public too, right? If you've got a card that you want more people to have access to and is expensive, just reprinting it as a way to not only get it in people's hands, but also give them reason to buy the set. One of the reasons that it would be hard to justify doing something like what I want, which is Mirage Remastered, is that I actually looked it up. You can't reprint Lion's Eye Diamond. It is
your motivation there isn't because wouldn't it be fun to draft, Mirage? It's more, God, these Lion's Eye Diamonds are expensive. I'd love to get more of them in circulation.
No, my motivation is because it'd be fun to draft Mirage.
Sure.
I would see that they could justify it by putting more Lion's Eye Diamond, maybe Vampiric Tutor. I don't know what else is in Mirage that's expensive. Undiscovered Paradise, perhaps. More of those out there. But really, I'm a player as much more so than a collector. So I'm looking at well, what's the draft experience? I actually wrote for TCGplayer/Channel Fireball a review of Dominaria Remastered of like, hey, what are the draft archetypes? What are the best rares? What are the best, commons in each color? That sort of thing. The set looks fun. I'll certainly be hoping to draft it. And I've generally liked Remastered as a way to get more cards into people's hands and give people a good draft experience. Because one of the cool things you can do is once you release a set or a draft format, and you can look back and think like, oh man, we would have done some things differently. I mean, it's impossible not to, right? It's a very complicated product and process.
You might not have printed a Gataxian probe, for example.
Right. Or in Ikoria, maybe you make Zenith Flare rare. And I think that just like makes the format better. Even when they re-release, when they do a throwback draft of Time Spiral block, they just remove Sprouts, which is a busted common, which actually did make the format kind of significantly worse just by
just destroy. Yeah, it warps everything around it. Right.
So Remastered gives you this opportunity to be like, okay, well, let's take this draft format in the case of Tempest Remastered, for example, and let's tighten it up. Let's do some things to make it better. Like if they
apply
were to
some modern design sensibility to something we made.
Exactly. If you're going to remaster Urza Saga block, for example, you maybe bump Pestilence to uncommon or just don't include it. Not a very fun card, really messes up limited. Dominaria is a little different because they're pulling so many sets. It's not like they're taking an existing draft format and like tweaking it.
They're trying to build something new with like a greatest hits tour almost.
But you have access to a lot of cards there. You can make a really cool set. And I tend to like Remastered a lot. Like I mentioned, if I could just choose a set to be remastered, I would love to see what a Mirage Remastered set looks like, just because I think Mirage is one of the best draft formats of all time. And getting to kind of take a second look at that, maybe with cards from other sets, maybe just tightening up that set. It's a pretty big block overall. That could be really cool. But again, I don't think that's like economically feasible. Not that we necessarily have to worry about that in hypotheticals, but if we're talking about products that could exist, I think that Mirage would need a little bit of help to kind of get across the finish line. But I think Dominaria is a great idea. That's a really cool way to kind of approach this.
Another motivation that like, I started playing a lot more recently than you did, but I am firmly in Magic Boomer territory now because I started playing in like New Phyrexia. And in my head, these are like 5-year-olds now playing Arena who are like, what's that? And it's an opportunity for Wizards to introduce core parts of Magic history to that new audience. And I think that's kind of what they did here with Dominaria. Because, when the Brothers War came out, the Brothers War, and now they have Phyrexia coming along. Those are big moments and references to big moments in Magic's past that I would say a concerningly large percentage of the modern game, the player base, have no idea what they mean or what that is or any of that stuff. So something like Dominaria Remastered lets them, reintroduce that and bring it back a little bit. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if Ravnica, original City of Guilds and Return to Ravnica as well are all, are not far from in the future. I would expect to see a big 9-set Ravnica condensed down to some Arena set in the future for sure.
Yeah, I mean, your answer is obviously the most logical one. If they're going to remaster something, Ravnica Remastered sounds like a perfect opportunity. Yeah. They've been there enough times that you could really pull that all together into a really cohesive, cool experience.
And it's a second chance for Dragon's Maze to really get a crack, the underappreciated set that it is.
Yeah, Dragon's Maze. No, didn't pass with flying colors. So yeah, Remastered is cool. It's a good way to kind of get more mileage out of the same stuff. Like you mentioned, they don't have to design new cards. They don't have to make new art.
Right.
It still takes a game designer or team of them to put things together so that they can kind of make these sets. They don't come out of nowhere, but it does take a lot of the burden away. It's a different constraint. You can't make new cards is a pretty savage constraint in designing a set, but there's so many cards that you can, it's like if you want a red burn spell for 2 mana, you can find it.
Right? Yeah.
If you want good build arounds at uncommon, there's plenty to be harvested. And it's also new. Look, when you get to combine a card from, let's say in the Ravnica example, Ravnica City of Guilds plus Return to Ravnica, those cards never been in the same format before. Putting them together creates something completely new. That's why Magic's so cool. Everything's more than the sum of its parts. So Remastered is a really, really elegant way to kind of create new content out of not actually making new cards, just all old cards.
Well, I'm going to come out of this expecting a Ravnica Remastered and crossing my fingers for a Mirage Remastered, but I'm not going to hold my breath on it.
The first one's a little more likely than the second.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way.